The Baroque period. It's something that's very interesting. The term Baroque could be Portuguese and deriving from the word barroco, meaning irregularly shaped pearl. Or some historians would assert that it is the Italian term of baracco, a stumbling block in medieval scholastic logic. The Baroque period in the 17th century just extended than any other style. It was visually easy to read, it was mannerism. When it came to the characteristics of the Baroque period, it would cause a gaze between our world and theirs. When you look at a figure, its psychological barrier between our worlds are very different, but yet so much very alike. It gives us this ability to enter into this world with even staring at the figures staring back at us and penetrating this psychological barrier in which comes into making the viewer susceptible to emotion, so we get the message of what the image or painting or sculpture is trying to appeal to us. Thus, this would spark a new set of artists for this era, such as Caravaggio, Artemisia, and Rembrandt. Baroque Renaissance artists were faced with essentially the same kinds of tests at work, largely in the same patrons: the court, the aristocrats, and the church. This ties in a lot with what happened prior and birthing the Baroque period, is the Council of Trent in 1545 through 1563. Now, what this is it's Catholics trying to regain its strength back in society because many have turned away from the Catholic Church and have left because of the Reformation. Also, the uprising of Lutheranism and Protestant were factors that were going against the Catholic Church. And so what they did was a systematic campaign in which marked the Baroque period era during that time. Furthermore, the artist that we're going to be taking a look at is Caravaggio, who was born in Milan with this family. His father worked as a mason for Francesco Sforza. Much of his childhood was spent in Milan, where he was an apprentice of the Bergamasque painter Simeon Pietrangelo for 4 years. Caravaggio must have traveled to Venice during his time of looking at the artistic sites, possibly in the year of 1588. As him seeking a successful career in art and in painting, he traveled to Rome at the age of 21, bringing along with his Northern European Italy style with him. Now, as he arrived in the fall of 1592, after a few meager years, he entered into the studio of Rome's most successful marinera painter. Much of in his career, Caravaggio would take random people off the street as well as homeless to use them as models, taking them into their studio for paintings and works of art that he planned to do. Now, Caravaggio was well known for this northern Italian painter who brought his own native traditions to central Italy. We're going to be taking a look at some of Caravaggio's work. Now, the first one we're going to be taking a look at is the Atonement of Christ, 1603 through 1604. Now, originally it was meant to be displayed in the Church of Pieta in Rome, but since it was so controversial, so dark, and as the Catholic Church said, it was very anti-Christ to paint this kind of painting, it now resides in Vatican City, where it is currently. Now, it is very interesting painting because we do see a lot going on here, but it is just in one little setting. And what I like is the diagonalism of the light and the dark and how it's just spread through the background, only for us to focus on this one specific moment and one specific thing: Christ's death and his body being taken. Now, what's very interesting is just this iconography of the whole thing. Christ is being crucified, and we see that his followers and his disciples are mourning. And we see these expressions on their faces so clearly ahead of their time. And these models that Caravaggio was using made a really good reference. Now, it brings us down to an earthly thing. It's more relatable to us that we see these facial expressions that we're able to analyze and able to relate to. And that's exactly where Caravaggio's intentions were. We see the advancement of their body language, knowing how they feel sorry for their savior being dead, and just so much more with it, that it is their world and our world connecting together. And we're able to see this and have this contact with them just by seeing what is going on. There's so much to this painting, though. We see that there is the injuries that Christ has suffered from. We see the stress that is on his disciples' face while he is carrying his legs. The seams doing so well with the shadows and the reflections, and with the color being more darker compared to other Renaissance paintings. This one is more down to the value of earthly colors and more of a reality look to it. The last work of art that we're going to be taking a look at from Caravaggio is his work of David with the Head of Goliath, 1610. Now, what's very interesting is the iconography, but what goes further into depth and how it relates to the artist. Now, this is from the book of Samuel, to where David has slain the great warrior Goliath and becomes king. What we see here is a lot of tubernism, and this lighting and being controlled and manipulated in order for us just to focus on this one specific action of him holding Goliath's head. Now, how this relates to Caravaggio is very interesting. So during this time, he wasn't very happy with his life. He's made a lot of mistakes and a lot of things that would make him immorally corrupt. And so what this painting is it's a representation of his old self to his new self being the head of Goliath. Noticing how that there's less light that is reflected on him, rather more reflected on presumably his old self, which is the representation of David and him in his younger days. Now, what this was was for the Catholic Church, in order for him to say that he is sorry and that if there is a way for him to be forgiven, which is kind of interesting in how this kind of ties in with the artist personally. Now, when you look at the painting again, it makes much more sense because we see a sense of despair in David's face after committing this act on Goliath. And we see that he doesn't feel victorious. He doesn't feel like he accomplished anything. He just feels this sorrow, this pain. And I think that's what is very well done when it comes to these kind of paintings. The iconography, but yet the representation of them will appeal to its audience as a more sorrowful thing.